Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History Ehx early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. He was born on October 23, 1976 in Vancouver, Canada, the youngest of 4 boys to James Chester, a former Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman who retired and then worked as a food wholesaler. His mother, Tamara Lee, worked in retail while caring for Patrick, Jeff, and Terry, who treated him not as a younger brother, but, in his words, a moving target. This young, nervous kid was sensitive and aware of everything around him, so he found solace in school plays. In the theater, his vulnerability became his superpower, rather than a problem. It would be one of the many things he would acquire along the way to becoming a world-famous actor, producer, and incredibly successful businessman and sports team owner. He has really done it all, but he never forgot his roots or the land that helped shape him.
This summer, my beloved Wrexham AFC played against the Vancouver Whitecaps in BC Place, and that, for me, that was one of the great pinch me moments of my life, which was that I'm standing in this luxury, owner's box in BC Place and looking up and back where I used to sit with my dad in the nosebleeds up there. And it was just a true pinch me moment.
I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History Ehx Biography, a new series of episodes where every other week I will sit down with prominent Canadians to learn more about them and how being Canadian has influenced their success. Today I bring you one of the most well-known people on the entire planet, and he just so happens to be from the Great White North. This is Canada's very own superhero who is way better than Wolverine, Ryan Reynolds. The first time I saw Ryan Reynolds was when he was around 16 years old and I was a young teenager. He was on my TV screen as the villainous Macro in The Odyssey, a Canadian-produced half-hour adventure fantasy series for children originally broadcast from 1992 to 1994 on CBC.
The Odyssey was a smart idea, though.
It was, yeah. It was so ahead of its time.
Roughly a kid goes into a coma and he's basically living this whole other life in his mind while he's in this coma, and he's trying to find his dad. And the only way out of this coma is to find his dad in this underworld where I played a kind of villain character, and the concept was really beautiful. And that was an interesting one.
Now, this show was way ahead of its time, and if you're a longtime listener, you'll remember that I shared its history back in May 2023, and I'll be re-releasing the episode this week as well, so you don't really have to search for it, just listen in a couple days. Now, if you're like me and you watched it, you know that The Odyssey was unlike anything from your youth. And while it may have been intended for kids and young adults, it was also smart, complex, and edgy. Far ahead of its time, so much so that it feels like a fever dream for some. I kept my eye out for the guy that played the villain in the future, because he made such an impact on my screen. But the reality is that Ryan Reynolds has been acting professionally for about 4 years by that point, since he was 12 years old. Now, his first major role came when he was 15 years old, when he got to play Billy Simpson.
In Canada, it was called Hillside. Everywhere else was called 15. It was like a teen soap, very drippy, soapy, oh my God. But you know who recently, or at least the guy, whenever I run into him, he brings it up, is Macaulay Culkin. He's like, can you break down that scene for me in 15 when Billy is going through a hard time because of his bullying sister? And it's just, I literally laugh my guts out. And God bless Mac for always having that wild card in his pocket.
The series, which followed the students of a fictional hillside school and dealt with a variety of issues including dating and divorce and alcohol abuse, infidelity, and friendships, ran from 1991 to 1993 on YTV in Canada and on Nickelodeon. As Ryan said, his character turned to bullying to cope with family issues and romantic rejections. And yes, it was drippy, as it played heavily into the stereotypes, including two characters named Dylan and Chris who wore leather jackets to show their toughness, but which would not completely disguise their inner selves. At one point, they play a gig with their band, Teenagers in Love, at the local eatery and hangout spot, the Avalon. Billy frequently hangs around Dylan and looks up to him, and an intervention from Dylan finally gets through to Billy, and he makes amends for his bullying. The first season of the show was filmed in Vancouver, so not too far from home for Ryan. But then the second season had him traveling to Ottawa to film at the studios of CJOH-TV, where fellow Nickelodeon series You Can't Do That on Television was also being filmed. Now, fun fact, this is the same show that Alanis Morissette appeared on for 5 episodes in the 1980s, and Ryan and Alanis would go on to date many years later, starting in 2002, and they were engaged for 3 years before calling it quits in February 2007. Meanwhile, back in the 90s, Ryan would go on to film the 3rd and 4th seasons of Hillside, also called 15 at Nickelodeon Studios Stage 18 at the Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. And by 1993, Ryan was nominated as a Best Young Actor co-starring in a cable series by the Young Artist Award, which honors excellence in youth performers. After that show ended, he made his feature film debut in Ordinary Magic, a coming-of-age drama where he played Jeffrey, an orphan raised in India who's inspired by Mahatma Gandhi to go on a hunger strike in small-town Canada. Directed by Giles Walker, the film received mixed to disappointing reviews, but soon Ryan would be appearing in CBC's Odyssey, which brings us to the mid-1990s. By then, Ryan was struggling to get his career off the ground. He was cast in a few small roles, including a guest spot on The X-Files, The Outer Limits, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, The John Larroquette Show, and the miniseries Cold Blood. Still, he needed to take odd jobs to make ends meet after completing high school, and actually for a time he worked a late-night shift at a supermarket. However, regardless of the struggles, he found comfort in Canada's lush, coastal rainforest.
Well, I'm reticent to say that because it's a special place for me. But I would say that Capilano River in British Columbia, in Vancouver, just outside of Vancouver. Well, it's, I think North or West Vancouver. North Vancouver, I think. No, West Vancouver. One of your listeners is going to go, you son of a bitch. That is not in here. I got that wrong. But I should not get that wrong because I've been going to Capilano River since I used to go almost every day after school. And then I, as an adult, when I would have to be shooting in LA, I shot a sitcom in my 20s, but it was a joke. The schedule was a joke. It was 3 weeks on and 1 week off. Best job on earth. Like, we got paid the same as the guys across the street shooting NYPD Blue who never once saw their family over the course of a year ever. Like 18-hour days, every day, relentless, dark, grim. And we did the sitcom we worked 5-6 hours a day and had the best time ever. And it was a job that I just still to this day, I think was the best job I ever had. But I would always drive home. Sometimes I would drive home on weekends. How crazy is that? We would shoot the show Friday, like at 8 or 9. It would be done by 10. I'd be in my Jeep YJ with no doors because they got stolen in LA. And I would drive to Vancouver. And then I would fly back because I hated flying, but I'd fly back to LA for Tuesday's rehearsal. And I did that for years and years and years. But every time I went back, I was really going back for Capilano River. Just to go back and see it, feel it. I don't know. I just had such a connection to it. I don't know why.
In the late 90s, Reynolds moved to Los Angeles with a friend, and it was there he landed his first major television role in 1998, playing a medical student on the sitcom Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place, which was later renamed Two Guys and a Girl. Now, the series started as a short-run 13-episode mid-season replacement on March 11th, 1998, and ran for 4 seasons, and Ryan starred alongside Richard Colo and Traylor Howard as the title characters. The ending was a planned series finale, its 81st episode on May 16, 2001, and was titled The Internet Show, because fans of the show voted on the character's outcome online, so kind of really ahead of its time. Now, after the show finished in 2001, Ryan made the jump to feature films. He starred in the comedy National Lampoon's Van Wilder, as a perennial, fun-loving college student. And while the film did poorly at the box office, it's now become a cult classic. And Ryan? Well, he was just getting started. For several years, Ryan appeared in a string of films that failed to find an audience, but he continued to carve his way into Hollywood.
I lived in Vancouver from the moment I was born to 18 or 19, and I moved down to Los Angeles. Then I kept coming back. I really found that I struggled with just even the concept of having a permanent fixed address in LA at the time. And I just really needed to be back in Vancouver as much as possible. And I also looked at Canada as a kind of a third parent to me. I think it was instrumental in, I think in my keeping myself, I would go so far as to say alive in my early 20s and being in Los Angeles and being in that kind of scene. I found that I was sort of a little bit more self-deprecating and kind of, I was lucky. I didn't fall into a lot of the pitfalls that maybe some of my peers did, but I also never experienced that meteoric kind of fame that some people experience, which is very dangerous, on so many levels.
Ryan's steps into superstardom were measured. He impressed with a cameo as the nurse in Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle in 2004, which Entertainment Weekly described as a single though memorable scene. He has a natural knack for comedy and an easy smile, but he was always searching for more, and so he was cast as Hannibal King, a vampire hunter who joins Blade in Blade Trinity. Released in 2004, it was Ryan's first dip into the Marvel Universe, but you couldn't really call it a super successful one, because that would come eventually. David Goyer, who made Blade Trinity and also wrote the script for the original Blade released in 1998 as well as its hit sequel, admits that Blade Trinity was a challenge for all those involved. He told The Hollywood Reporter in 2021, quote, "I don't think anyone involved in that film had a good experience on that film. Certainly I didn't. I don't think anybody involved with that film is happy with the results. It was a very tortured project." End quote. To prepare for the role, Reynolds focused on gaining muscle by training 6 days a week and adhering to a 3,200 calorie diet. He gained 11 kilograms or 24 pounds of muscle in 3 months, and his transformation into an action hero was well earned, and the movie was a success at the box office. It grossed $132 million on a $65 million budget, but it was not greatly reviewed by critics, and Blade was put on ice for 20 years until Ryan helped revive it. But we'll get there. I don't want to get ahead of myself. In the meantime, Ryan starred in the 2005 remake The Amityville Horror, an adaptation of the 1977 novel and remake of the 1979 film of the same name, for which his performance was greatly praised by critics. Collider's Sean Van Horn said he was funny and charming, but toned down as if he's not performing for a camera. Then Ryan's comedy chops were once again on full display as Monty, the charismatic waiter in Rob McKittrick's 2005 comedy Waiting, and in the comedy Just Friends from the same year. In that film, he played Chris Brander, an overweight high schooler trying to escape the quote-unquote friend zone with his best friend played by Amy Smart during a Christmas visit to his hometown. But for most of the early 2000s, it seemed like Ryan's career ebbed and flowed as critics acknowledged his performances and comedic talent, even though the films themselves sometimes received poor receptions.
Having that kind of career where it's like a step forward, a couple steps back, a couple steps forward, maybe one step back. It always kind of felt like that. And I'm glad for that now. Really glad.
In 2008, he starred in the critically acclaimed and commercially successful romantic comedy Definitely Maybe, where he played Will Hayes, a man in the middle of a divorce proceeding who is questioned by his daughter about how he and his mother first met. This kind of marked a turn towards romantic comedy, as he then starred in 2009's Adventureland, in which he played Mike Connell, a technician and part-time musician. I really enjoy that film, and critics praise the film as well, and it has an approval rating of 89% on Rotten Tomatoes. 2009 is also the year he made his return to the Marvel Universe as Wade Wilson, Deadpool/Weapon 11 in the superhero film X-Men Origins Wolverine. it would be the role that would change everything. As early as 2003, Ryan had expressed interest in and involvement in a potential Deadpool film adaptation. He'd been developing his own project with David S. Goyer at New Line Cinema, but the project fell apart as they focused on Blade Trinity and the aborted spin-off. David Benioff had been pursuing the project under 20th Century Fox for almost 3 years before he was hired to write the script in October 2004. And he wrote Deadpool into the script in a manner that Hugh Jackman described as fun while also deviating from some of his traits. Ryan took his opportunity to don the Deadpool suit because although during its first day of wide release, Wolverine took in an estimated $35 million, but for the most part, critics hated it. Tom Charity of CNN commented, "Serviceable but inescapably redundant. This Wolverine movie does just enough to keep the X-Men franchise on life support, but the filmmakers will have to come up with some evolutionary changes soon if it's going to escape extinction." However you might feel about the film, one thing was abundantly clear. Ryan Reynolds was born to play Deadpool. He stole every scene and made such a massive impact, I bet you don't remember much of the plot, but you definitely remember him. And now he had a bona fide box office hit in his resume, and he followed it up with another whopper when he starred as Andrew Paxton in Anne Fletcher's romantic comedy, The Proposal. In it, America's sweetheart Sandra Bullock plays Margaret Tate, a Canadian editor-in-chief at a New York City book publishing company, universally disliked by most everyone. A visa violation means she is threatened with deportation back to Canada, and she forces her long-suffering personal assistant, played by Ryan, into marrying her so she can get a green card. Now hijinks ensue, and in the process, the on-screen chemistry between Ryan and Sandra was completely undeniable. It made the movie, which had a $40 million budget, a massive success as it grossed over $317 million worldwide. Now, teaming up with Sandra allowed Ryan to once again showcase his comedic talents while continuing to prove he was a box office success and incredibly popular with audiences. He continued to thrive professionally and expanded in range with the independent drama Baird in 2010. In the film, Ryan played civilian truck driver Paul Conroy, who is attacked and then finds himself buried alive in a wooden coffin with only a lighter, flask, flashlight, knife, glow sticks, pen, pencil, and a mobile phone. Now for me, the idea of being buried alive is absolutely terrifying, and I can say that I really enjoyed this movie, but I was definitely feeling it, watching it on screen, and feeling a little bit of that claustrophobia. The film was shot in Barcelona over 16 days, and while I just had a bit of claustrophobia watching it, Ryan has said he suffered from claustrophobia while filming because the coffin was gradually filled with sand as filming went on. He described the last day of shooting as unlike anything I experienced in my life, and I never, ever want to experience that again. Baird premiered at the Sundance Film Festival on January 23, 2010, and it sparked a bidding war with distributors, and a deal that was initially estimated at $3.2 million would ultimately come to $10 million. It was also lauded critically. Now, Scott Mantz of Access Hollywood called it a brilliantly twisted suspense thriller that would have made Alfred Hitchcock proud. Film director John Waters named Baird as one of the 10 best films of 2010 and said, "The most excruciating, painful date movie imaginable comes complete with a very smart feel-bad ending. See it with someone you hate." Ryan followed up his indie success with another big-budget movie, and this time he would play the titular character. The gamble didn't exactly work out, but it did alter the course of his life. In early 1997, Warner Brothers approached cult filmmaker and comic book writer Kevin Smith to make a Green Lantern film. He turned it down and was kicked around Hollywood for several years. At one point, Quentin Tarantino was offered the chance to write and direct, but the project had mostly stalled until Gregory Berlanti was hired by Warner Brothers to write and direct in October 2007. Now, to say the project was doomed from the start might be unfair, but it is important to note that Martin Campbell was brought on board in February 2009 after Berlanti was forced to vacate the director's position. The movie follows the Green Lantern Corps in their pursuit to preserve intergalactic order which has existed for centuries. Its newest recruit, Hal Jordan, played by Ryan, is the first human to join the ranks. The Green Lanterns have very little regard for humans, who have thus far been unable to harness the powers of the ring which each member wears. But Jordan, a gifted and bit of a cocky test pilot, seems to be the universe's only hope when a new enemy threatens the universal balance of power. Green Lantern was released in the United States on June 17, 2011 by Warner Bros. Pictures, and it was not well received. Audiences were critical of the script, tone, visual effects, and the lack of adherence to the source material. On top of that, it only grossed $237 million against a production budget of $200 million at the box office, and any future plans by Warner Bros. For a franchise were pretty much immediately scrapped. Although he didn't receive superhero success with Green Lantern, the movie is where he met his future wife, Blake Lively, who played Carol Ferris, the female lead and love interest in the superhero film. The pair began dating in 2011 and got married about a year later. Meanwhile, Ryan's career continued to ebb and flow until it reached the stratosphere in 2016, and that's when he returned to the role he was always meant to play, Deadpool. Now, as I mentioned, the film had been in development since as early as 2000, and by March 2005, Ryan had learned that Fox was expressing interest in a film featuring a cameo by Deadpool in X-Men Origins Wolverine, and as we know, he was cast in that part. His role was expanded during the film's production as he proved himself to be the best man for the role. And executives of Fox took note, and after the box office success of Wolverine, the studio officially began development of Deadpool, with Ryan set to star. This spin-off would ignore the Wolverine version of Deadpool and return to the character's slapstick comedic roots. Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick were hired to write the script in January 2010, and Ryan worked very closely with them. In April 2011, Tim Miller was hired as director after working on the visual effects for some of the X-Men films, in part because of his work creating animated short films. It would be Miller's directorial debut, and by then, Ryan had a deal with Fox to produce it. But then, The Green Lantern was released, and it threw a wrench into things over at Fox. Executives were already concerned about Deadpool's R-rating content, but as we all know, the film simply couldn't be anything else. The project then stalled again in 2012 with the release of Marvel Studios' The Avengers. At first, Reese and Wernick thought Deadpool might be easily approved by Fox as it was already a developed superhero film. But the film actually caused Fox to be even more doubtful about the script and began exploring ways to include Deadpool in other properties instead. It was all extremely frustrating for everyone involved, and it may have been the end of the story, except test footage of Ryan voicing a CGI version of the script was leaked online in 2014. And people loved it. And the enthusiasm caused Fox to finally greenlight the project and gave Deadpool a release date of February 12th, 2016. But it came with a catch. In exchange for making the film they wanted, Ryan and company would have a much smaller budget to work with. Co-writer Rhett Reese said the studio's cuts to the film budget made the script better for it. He said, "It was that last lean and mean chop that got us to a place where Fox was willing to make it. The script was very efficient and not too long. That was a function of a budget more than anything, but I think it really made the movie pace nicely." They had written a draft of the script every year for 6 years before completing the film, and about 70% of the first draft ended up in the final film, which began principal photography on March 23rd, 2015 in Ryan's hometown of Vancouver, British Columbia. Ryan Reynolds would be making his film at home, and he hired more than 2,000 locals as actors, extras, and crew members.
I've been lucky to, I guess it's one of the greatest, byproducts / side effects of my job is that I've been everywhere. I've really been lucky to see the world. And, it's really been something wonderful, but to see it through the eyes of a Canadian is always great. It's like one of those things where anywhere you go, if someone else is Canadian, it's the first thing they say to me. And I take that as a huge compliment because that would suggest that I've done some of my job, which is part of my work and part of my life is to make Canada in my own small way, as best as I can, a little bit better. a little bit broader, and make it a better place somehow. I feel like that's sort of our civic duty to a certain degree.
One thing I have always liked about Ryan Reynolds is that he is unabashedly Canadian. Whether it's in the charity work he does here or the roles he chooses, he always finds a way to sprinkle a little bit of our country into the mix.
Only in the movies I write and produce, really, but because I wouldn't want to do that to someone else's movie. Deadpool and Wolverine was easy because Sean Levy is from Montreal and I'm from Vancouver. So no, I always try to put a little something here or there about the things that are most meaningful to me. There are many things people still have never seen in some of the movies or figured out. A good example is I always have a John Candy nod in every single one of the Deadpool movies. I'm always care. At some point, you see the book, the Canadian mounted book that John Candy is reading in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I even steal a line of his in Deadpool 2 where I say, I like me, and I'm obviously I'm performatively trying to, make some emotion happen with Colossus. But yeah, Canada's kind of all over everything I do. And I think it really is largely inside my body more so than it is external. It's very much in my DNA to laugh at myself.
Now, this is something that Deadpool also does, and one of the reasons it's been such a massive success from the second it premiered on February 8th, 2016. It grossed a worldwide total of $783.1 million against a budget of $58 million, and it broke records from its opening weekend sales across the world and went on to become the highest grossing X-Men film, as well as the 9th highest grossing film of the year. Deadpool was a box office juggernaut, and it was critically beloved, as well as a fast, funny, fourth-wall busting, profane spectacle that subverted the superhero formula, all while being decidedly not family-friendly. It was nominated for 2 Golden Globe Awards, 4 Critic Choice Movie Awards, winning 2, a Directors Guild of America Award, a Producers Guild of America Award, and a Writers Guild of America Award. This led many to believe Deadpool would be a serious contender for several Academy Awards, so when the film did not receive any, it was widely considered to have been snubbed. Now, it may not have gotten the Academy's stamp of approval, but Deadpool did something much more lucrative for Ryan. It launched a franchise. The sequel, Deadpool 2, was released in May 2018 to comparable critical and commercial success. Then, following the acquisition of 21st Century Fox by Disney, the character's film rights were returned to Marvel Studios along with the X-Men and the Fantastic Four. This allowed for the highly anticipated Deadpool and Wolverine, a third film starring Ryan alongside his Wolverine co-star Hugh Jackman. Now remember how I said that Blade was put on ice for 20 years? Well, Ryan de-thawed him for this movie. In an Instagram post, Ryan wrote, "The reaction when Wesley Snipes enters the movie is the most intense thing I've ever heard in a theater." It was a massive success when it was released on July 26th, 2024. And along the way, Ryan released multiple other projects per year, solidly establishing him as a Hollywood rainmaker, even after he announced he would be taking a little bit of a sabbatical from his work after the production of Spirited in 2022. And that's because Ryan wasn't only doing films. He had launched Maximum Effort, a production company, in January 2018, and he signed a 3-year first-look deal with Fox. That same year, he acquired a stake in Aviation American Gin, and then took the role overseeing the brand's creative direction to immense success. He sold Aviation American Gin to Diageo in a deal valued of up to $610 million. He also purchased an ownership stake in Mint Mobile in November 2019, holding between 20% and 25%. In 2020, Ryan joined the board of Match Group. A year later, he sold his production company's marketing division, which had been spun off into a separate company to create ads for his film projects and brands like Peloton to MNTN Software. Ryan has the Midas touch when it comes to business, and then he turned his sights on sports. Ryan, alongside American actor and creator of one of my favorite shows, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Rob McElhenney, announced their intention to buy Wrexham AFC, a Welsh Professional Association football club based in northeast Wales in the United Kingdom. The team played in the National League, the fifth tier of the English Football League system, below the Premier League and the three tiers of the English Football League. At the time, the team was described to be struggling to the point of near collapse and under threat to its continued existence. The deal was completed as the Wrexham Supporters Trust, a fan-operated company since 2011, approved the two actors to a £2 million takeover by 98.6%. Rob and Ryan embraced the Welsh culture, the team, and fully threw themselves into being team owners. They promoted the language in their media projects, and Ryan asked that Welsh subtitles be included with his Netflix movie Red Notice in 2021. The whole fascinating process of their investment in Wrexham is covered by the television documentary series Welcome to Wrexham. During and since their takeover, Wrexham rose in the ranks of the National League from 8th place to 2nd at the end of their first year of ownership. The team successfully secured promotion to the EFL League 2 during the 2022-2023 season, and during the 2023-2024 season, they won a back-to-back promotion to EFL League 1. Ryan also pursued ownership of the National Hockey League's Ottawa Senators, but withdrew his bid in the middle of 2023. He later became part of an investor group that acquired a 24% stake in the Alpine F1 team, and through all of his incredible success, he remains proudly Canadian.
Some people see Canada, they don't differentiate it from America. And then other folks, they see Canada as like this just absolutely pristine playground. It's not a place to visit as much as it is a place to experience, So usually people have a story, some kind of story being in Vancouver or being somewhere on the East Coast, or, there's a real joie de vivre when they talk about Canada and what it's done. But, when I talk to, I'm pretty close with a lot of the SNL folks, and like when you speak with them, they talk about Canada as one of the funniest countries, which I disagree with. I don't find like Canada funny. I find like certain Canadians are very funny as a result of Canada. But I think it's Canada's like bureaucratic governmental dryness that is what breeds, I think, some funny people, as opposed to just the myth that there might be something in the water. Sorry, I'm rambling on, but somebody recently said, "Oh, Canadians, they're so kind, but they get fucking crazy when integrity is at stake." And I was like, "Oh, I love that. Like, yeah, that's true. Like I know if somebody is operated in a way that lacks integrity, my instinct is to bring a nuclear warhead to a knife fight, which is not also not best practices, by the way. That is something that isn't necessarily a good thing. But my dad was a bit like that, and maybe it's because he was a cop, or my dad was a very tough guy, but he struggled in a lot of ways, but he always had so much integrity. And I remember that being not just a dad trait to me, but a Canadian kind of trait. Mm-hmm. I don't pretend that, I don't go so far as like a kind of a jingoistic kind of pride, because that can be a little dangerous. But I am immensely proud of it. I mean, I somehow work it into everything. I mean, I don't know how it pops up on every talk show I do, or every, there's just enough differentiation that it becomes kind of like an anecdote farm for a number of different reasons. But I'm really proud to be Canadian, just, because it's a country that has albeit a very checkered past, and like a lot of countries, there's a tremendous amount of maybe overlooked tragedy that is and systemic tragedies that have happened there. But the thing I'm proud of is the yearning to grow and be better, and I think that really is a trait of Canada. I think humanity is, if I were to distill it into one word, there's a humanity there that I think is incredibly important, vital, and a resource that is intensely scarce right now. I feel like that's something that I grew inside of myself in Canada, and it's something that especially particularly in the present moment, has never been more valuable. A French writer called it collective effervescence, and I really thought that was a beautiful way of stating an experience in which people from all different walks of life are taking in, enjoying, or otherwise loving the same thing at the same time in the same exact moment as a feeling. It's like a drug almost. And I think it's more important now than it's ever been to, keep creating venues for joy and togetherness.
This is why I want to start this series above all else. As Canadians, we tend to keep our love for our country just hidden under the surface. And it seems like during the past few months, for the first time in living memory, our very sovereignty is under threat. I've seen our flags fly off store shelves, Made in Canada stickers are everywhere, and almost everyone is ready with an elbows up. And I want to focus on what makes us special.
I think Canadians are intensely proud to be Canadian, but I don't think that they use it or weaponize it in the way, someone else might. And there's dozens of countries around the world that might sort of look at things differently, but Canadians are, I think, really feel very proud of their country. And what they really love to do is, at least from what I've experienced, is share it, share that experience. And sharing, weirdly, is like I think a way to mitigate a lot of different things. Like I know that sounds weird to be 48 years old and I've worked in an industry like showbiz for as long as I have, but it wasn't until I figured out that sharing that public facing image or fame or whatever you want to call it was such a huge part of my own well-being. Giving it away, like, when somebody asks for a photo or a selfie, it's like I usually try to quickly do a video for someone that means something to them as well, or like just something that it's exponentially more valuable to give it away than it is to keep it.
Although Ryan says he's happy that we keep some things just for ourselves. Why do you feel like America never really latched on to the Tragically Hip and we kind of kept it as like a Canadian thing?
I was in Kingston, Ontario yesterday, standing at the intersection of Tragically Hip Way and Ontario Street, or Way. I'm not really sure if it was a way. Maybe it was a crescent. God, but you could even feel it there. You'd feel this pulsating kind of joy and pride and love for the town and for the community. Double-edged sword, isn't it, Craig? Because part of us would be bummed if we lost them the way we lost Celine. I mean, we didn't lose Celine. She's intensely Canadian. It was sort of, but I don't know. Maybe I'm being an asshole thinking about it like this, but or it's elitist or something. But I always love it when something gets to stay yours. When you find a band that just speaks to you on some level. And, the hip was like the supercharged version of that, but it really stayed rooted in Canada. So I now there's millions of people who adore and embrace and love the hip, even in America, but not the way it is in Canada. In Canada, that is something that I think trying to expand into the States and those kinds of places actually contributed to the gravitational pull of Canada, bringing them back. I don't know anybody who relates to the hip without also folding in Canada, Ontario, the East Coast, the early days, I saw them pull up in Sudbury in minus 40 degree weather in the old Nickel City there, and performing a show at someplace. This is maybe 14 years ago or 13 years ago. And I remember being there with my wife, and we were, I was like, we're going to shoot this movie up in Sudbury. She was curious, what is Sudbury like? And skulls. It's a nickel mine. There's a museum. Apparently they have flying squirrels at the museum. We can go see that. And that was all true. I just didn't really prepare her for the minus 40 degrees, like your actual platelets in your blood freezing solid the second you step outside.
No matter where his life may take him, his roots are here, and he makes sure he shares his love for Canada because in some ways, he never left.
This summer, my beloved Wrexham AFC played against the Vancouver Whitecaps in BC Place. And that, for me, that was one of the great pinch me moments of my life, which was that I'm standing in this like luxury, whatever, owner's box in BC Place next to my daughter, watching a team, half of which I own, play against the Vancouver Whitecaps, and looking up and back where I used to sit with my dad in the nosebleeds up there, watching, Louis Bisaglia kick balls through during warm up. And it was just a true pinch me moment. And the next day, my daughter and we went to Granville Island for a bit, which is incredibly beautiful, lovely. It's one of my favorite places to go. And then Capilano River, and seeing my daughter in Capilano River with the look on her face with such fulfillment. I'd never seen her look so fulfilled in my life. It was my screensaver on my phone forever. And I had to take it off because I kept getting choked up every time I looked at it and just thought about her. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. As he said, Canada is always close to his heart, and his upcoming project might be one of the most personal ones to date.
I'm doing a almost finished, but a finishing documentary that I'm doing with Colin Hanks and Maximum Effort on John Candy's life, and we've just been given so much the privilege of so much footage never seen before, home videos, and it's a real portrait of a man who is at once hilarious, charming, deeply kind, and incredibly vulnerable. And it's all of those things together, which I think make the magic that was John Candy. And I would have loved to have had more of an opportunity to ask John about his persona, because he always had such a dignity in the way he spoke. And I'm not talking about his movies, I'm talking about his life. And I really would love to have known that man. I think I might be the only person in the documentary who didn't know. And he and I have a weirdly similar arc. We tend to use anxiety in different ways and overfunction. I tend to overfunction with it. I tend to do too much, sometimes extend myself beyond reasonable limits in order to take care of other people. Sometimes I'll just agree to do a random podcast in the middle of the day, hosted by Craig Baird. But John did the same thing, including sports ownership. It was, and that is a racket that is very difficult because it's always culturally, it's always tied culturally to the community that it's around, and it's you have to be very, very careful. You have to be willing to say, "I don't know." You have to be. You just have to be honest as the day is long, just, about everything. And you won't have as many problems, but sports ownership, as we know, there's a lot of mercurial folks that do it. But seeing John do that and just kind of watching him sort of do too much is something that I really felt a connection to. I'm better about it now, but there was a time in my life when I did more than I should. I would bite off more than I could chew, but I would find some way to chew it and swallow it and take another bite.
I would love to thank Ryan for inspiring me to do this series and for taking the time to speak with me. Now, a couple of months ago, he requested I share the history about the Maple Leaf gold heist. I will be re-releasing that episode this week with a short story from Ryan, which includes the reason why he reached out. I'll also be re-releasing my episode of The Odyssey, which was where I first was introduced to Ryan Reynolds acting for the first time. And in 2 weeks, I'll be back with another episode of Canadian History Ehx Biography.
Even when skating was at its peak and I had to win nationals and win worlds. And then all of a sudden everything came in. But by that point, I've already kind of made it. So it's the journey up that's the hard part, right?
Join me as I bring you the story of figure skating icon Elvis Stojko. And next week, we're going to be talking about that amazing Toronto neighborhood of Kensington Market. I hope you enjoyed that episode and our look and speaking with Ryan Reynolds. If this is your first time listening and you like what you heard, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review. And I love hearing from you. And if you have a show topic you want me to cover, you can email me at craig@canadaehx.com. You can also visit my website as well as my social media. I will include all of those in my show notes. Until next time, I'm Craig Baird, and this was Canadian History Ehx.